Please join me in welcoming Dheerja.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim, and thank you for having me. Very excited to be part of this community. Welcome to my talk, which is going to be about how we think about building products for loyal audiences, both at theSkimm, but I'm going to talk a little bit about ESPN. So as a starting point, how many of you are familiar with theSkimm? Holy shit, that's awesome. Okay, it's usually a little bit less than that, so that is really exciting. How many of you are familiar with ESPN? Trick question. Okay, so how many of you think that there are a lot of similarities between those two companies? Okay, cool. So I'm going to prove most of you wrong. All right, so before I get started, I want to talk a little bit about kind of my background and kind of this connective tissue that I've felt throughout my career. So as Tim mentioned, I've always been in digital product development. Started out my career at ESPN in engineering, moved into product. I was actually the first PM at ESPN, so lots of stories about that, really fascinating. Joined theSkimm when it was 10 people writing a newsletter and helped it grow over the last few years into a company of over 120 employees. But talking a little bit about ESPN. So ESPN was a super awesome experience. Worked in a lot of different products across mobile, ESPN.com, worked in a little startup within ESPN called Grantland, and it was super fun, but most importantly, I got to build for sports fans. Sports fans are so awesome to build for because they are obsessed with your products, but it's because they have this like general love for sports that is so genuine and starts from the day that they are born. So from the day that they are born, they love their team, they love their players, they love sports, they want to eat it up every minute of every day, and getting to build products for that obsessive audience base is the coolest thing in the world. So then when I joined theSkimm, what was interesting is that I got to build for an almost equally, if not differently, obsessed audience. So theSkimm, as some of you may know, is a company that helps female millennials live smarter, is what we like to say. We focus on kind of delivering information to them in a very relatable way, helping them feel confident and empowered as they go about their lives. And again, it was kind of a really natural extension of what I did at ESPN, which is thinking about an audience that wants to eat up everything that you do and figuring out how you solve their problems in a way that makes an even deeper relationship between them and your brand. And it's just been a really, really awesome journey kind of connecting the dots between those things and having that be a connective tissue. So I'm going to go over 3 things today. So the first is how we actually build products at theSkimm, the story of how we did that, and then how you can actually apply that to your products and with the way you think about building products for your audience at your company. So let's start with the story of theSkimm. So our Skimm founders were actually TV news producers. So they were producing the nightly news at NBC. They would come home late at night and talk to their friends who were women, working professionals, doctors, lawyers, bankers, what have you. And every night their friends would ask them, what's happening? Tell me what's happening in the world. What's going on? And they realized that the product that they were creating, which was the nightly TV news, was not actually reaching this audience, that there was a fundamental disconnect between the way news was being delivered and created and the way this audience actually went about their daily routines and daily lives. And so they quit their jobs and started theSkimm. And I absolutely love this founding story because I think it shows that from day one, theSkimm has had an obsession with being customer first and being user first, because it fundamentally thought about how can we fit information into somebody's routine? How can we solve their problems? How can we fit news in a way that makes sense for them and the way they go about living their lives? So when they thought about quitting their jobs and starting that first product, they kind of looked at the daily life of a millennial woman and was like, okay, she goes about her day. What does she do throughout her day? How does she kind of use her phone? And for the news, what is the best way to get that in front of her in the most seamless way possible? You check your email. So we like to call this the one eye open routine. So every morning, we all do this probably. We wake up, we turn off our alarm, we look at our phone, and we check our email. And so they started the Daily Skimm, which is our kind of anchor product, was our first product, and it's an email newsletter that focuses on delivering news right into your inbox first thing in the morning, giving you kind of a quick rundown of the headlines of what's happening in the world to get you started to go about your day. And the beauty of this really simple product and delivering it right into somebody's routine first thing in the morning is that it immediately built a habit and it built a relationship. So when I joined theSkimm a couple years later, again, it was like 10 people, a newsletter, but I would get on the phone with our users every single day for about a month, and they were obsessed with this company and this product. They would literally talk about theSkimm as if it was their best friend. They would say, you know, I wake up, I brush my teeth, I drink my coffee, I read my Skimm, I go to work. It was just part of their routine and part of their day and part of their life in a way that is really, really special and built such a strong relationship with kind of their daily routine. So once I got there, we started thinking about, okay, how do we build out new products beyond the newsletter? We built a really strong relationship with this audience. We have that habit. We have that routine with them. What do we do next? And so we spent some time, like I said, talking to them and thinking about, you know, what are all the problems that they have in their life? You know, what could theSkimm do for them? What throughout their week, throughout their day, what are the things that come up where they could use a piece of information to just feel a little bit more confident, a little bit more empowered about what's going on? And we started to center around a specific problem, which is that a lot of people would say, hey, theSkimm, you always tell me what happened, you give me kind of the rundown, so the State of the Union was last night, here's what went down, but I never know when things are actually about to happen. So when is the State of the Union? When is the UN General Assembly? When is voter registration deadline? When is the Super Bowl? When is March Madness? I'm either constantly Googling these things or a little bit behind the curve. So we started to center around this like general problem that seems like wasn't being served with traditional content, traditional media. And then we started ideating, and we came up with such a simple solution, which was a calendar. So what I love about this is that it really speaks to the simplicity of being routine and audience-oriented, because we thought about, okay, how could we actually solve this problem in a way that is right where somebody is when they're thinking about what they're doing on their phone, what they're doing in their routine. And obviously, with our audience, there are three main apps they're using every single day: their email, their calendar, and their texting apps. And so we came up with this, again, really simple idea that was, let's actually just create a calendar for them that curates all of the information and all the events that are happening in the world and delivers it right to them in their actual calendar. So you can see here anything from the G7 summit to when Ramadan begins, to the Tony Awards, to the World Cup starts. These are all things that are integrated right into their actual calendar app. So we had the idea, and then we did what I call the pre-MVP. So to me, what the pre-MVP is saying is, what is not just the most simplest product we can use to get user feedback, but how do we actually just test the content in its purest form? Because as theSkimm, so much of what we do is delivering content into somebody's routine. So let's test just the content. So this is before we had an engineering team, a design team. Our co-founder and myself created a private Google Calendar. That's an actual screenshot. And we shared it with 50 beta testers. And we're like, tell us what you think. And we programmed it every week. We got feedback. We learned about the types of things they would actually want to see in their calendar. So we actually tested a bunch of crap. So we did anything from, we put the daily Skimm as an event in their calendar at 6 a.m. every morning to see if that's what they wanted in there. We put book recommendations in there, and then we put obviously actual events. So you can see this is from a few years ago. Lindsey Graham wants to become president. That feels timely. But yeah, it was such a great way for us to just get really quick, rapid feedback with something that took me 5 minutes to set up. And then from the feedback, we realized that we were onto something, because people immediately felt like they had struck gold. They were like, finally, theSkimm is just literally curating the things that are happening in the world directly into my calendar. So we built that out into a kind of a paired calendar and app experience. This is the very early first MVP design of the app. It has definitely evolved a lot. And again, it was such a simple utilitarian product of just keeping you up to date on what's coming up in the world. So then from there, after the MVP, we decided that we wanted to test this out as a subscription product. So then we started talking pricing. And if any of you have worked in consumer subscriptions, anybody will tell you that you can ask somebody what they will pay for something, but it does not tell you shit until you actually make them put their credit card down for it. So it was an interesting time in our development, because we kind of found a sweet spot where the core product was kind of ready to ship, and what was being built was the account and payments infrastructure that sat on top of that. So we decided that in parallel to building out the accounts and payments flows, we were going to test the product with a price point on it. So we got super scrappy. I threw up 5 different Squarespace landing pages with 4 different price points and 1 free price point. We threw kind of a Stripe integration on there. We were manually adding people to test flight when they paid, and it was all to actually test pricing. And the impetus for this was, again, people will tell you what they want to pay, but it'll never mean anything until you actually make them pay for it. But it was also because we were arguing about this for like days. I remember us just sitting in a room and I was throwing out $1, $5, $10, and we were just arguing back and forth. And it was so important for us to nail our first subscription product, right? That we decided to actually just effing test it. So again, we had 4 different price points, 1 free group, and we pulled 5 cohorts that were a true cross-section of the newsletter audience. And we had them sign up for a trial with their credit card. We tested it for 2.5 months. So we looked at upfront conversion, we looked at trial to paying, and we looked at churn for 1 more month on top of that. And we netted out at $3 a month, which is what we went to market with. So then from there, the beauty of working at a company like theSkimm is that you don't just launch products, you activate your audience, which is like a term I now use all the time. So for us, this is all about saying we have a highly engaged audience already. They are obsessed with the brand, they want to eat up anything that we create for them. And so when you launch something, you don't just kind of send out a cool marketing email and call it a day, you really get them bought in. And so before launch, as we were testing out these price points, we also started to put together our community activation strategy. So theSkimm has this concept of Skimm'ambassadors. They are our super fans. There are now 33,000 of them, which is still insane for me to think about. And they are our boots on the ground. We consider them an extension of the company. They put it on their LinkedIn profiles. They really consider themselves part of who we are. And so we took advantage of that. So what we did was about a few months before launch, we gave them all early access to test flight. We had them play around with it. We let them use it for 3 months. And during that time, we actually trained them on PR and marketing. So we taught them like classes, we gave them tips, and we literally called them the Skimm PR squad. And so when we actually went to market and launched, we shot to the top of the App Store. Thousands of 5-star reviews within 1 hour. Apple personally called us and asked if we had hacked something. They had never seen anything like it. And I we'll save this screenshot forever. And we were like top 10 app overall. It was truly incredible, and obviously the numbers are awesome. It was like the best day of my life, but even more importantly, it was such a power of community. I mean, we took this audience that already loved the brand, and we tapped into them in a very organic way. We made them feel like they were a part of this, that they launched this with us, and it just shot up as a result of that. So since then, we've continued to launch a series of products, but what I think has been really fun about the app strategy specifically is that we've really stayed true to that core philosophy of fitting information into your routine. And so as we've continued to build out features within the app, we've launched more things that integrate into the different parts of your phone. So we actually launched a texting product last year where it's a kind of news concierge service that lets you text in your questions about different topics in the world every week. And it's just another seamless way for theSkimm to fit right into your phone. So what I like to say is that theSkimm's sort of product dream is that you have this app on your phone, but all of that information is integrated into all the other apps that you use as well. And it feels like a seamless part of your day and a part of your routine. And that is a really core to who we are and how we think. So since then, we have grown a lot. So obviously employee-wise we've grown, but we've also grown that audience at a really fantastic rate. So we now have 7 million women who read us every single day. That app is still a top 3 grossing news app in the App Store, right up there with the New York Times and the Washington Post, and I will say that every single day and smile. And we have over 30,000 Skimm'ambassadors, like I mentioned. And then most importantly to me personally is that we've managed to do that level of audience activation at entirely new levels. So we have registered over 100,000 people to vote through our own voter registration tools. We got 200,000 women to the polls at the midterm election last year. And that is just an incredible showing of what theSkimm is able to do with its audience and with its products. All right, so let's talk about how we do all of this. You heard the story, but okay, what are the real kind of methodologies and philosophies that we apply to actually going about doing this? Excuse me. So first and foremost is company culture. So we are obsessed with being obsessed with our audience, but also making sure that the company and every single employee lives and breathes these people we call skimmers. So we have tried to, it's hard sometimes, we've tried to ban the word users, ban the word customers. They are skimmers, they are our members, they are our audience, they are part of who we are. And I can't emphasize enough how much like silly, seemingly frivolous things like that make such a big difference. Because today at 110 employees, I'll walk into a meeting with a sales team and they're all just talking about skimmers constantly. When we are pitching it to clients, when we are talking about building products, we are saying she and her and skimmers and what does she want and what do they say and what do they want, and we are constantly testing. And that is not just methodology, that is culture. And that is fundamental to who we are. It's fundamental to how we started back when our founders quit their jobs and created that email newsletter. And is so vital to how we think about building out products to find that continuous product market fit as we build out new offerings. Part of that also is actually knowing who they are. So it's not just saying the thing, it's actually kind of putting your money where your mouth is. And so I like to say that we could describe our skimmers down to the very drink that they order at brunch. And I'm not kidding. Like our company and our employees can say everything about this person, who they are, where they live and what that breakdown looks like, what they do, what they read, what they like, what problems they have going about their day and going about their lives. And that is driven by constant user research and insights work that we do on a daily and a weekly basis. Part of that is that we invest really heavily in broad strokes research, so we do diary studies on a very consistent basis. We get on the phone with our audience at least once every 2 weeks, whether it's for product testing or just asking them questions. And it is, again, really, really embedded in the DNA of who we are and what this company does all the time. What I like to say, too, is that this is really similar to ESPN and Grantland back when I was going to try to connect the dots between these things, right? So at ESPN, it was very similar. I remember being in all the conference rooms, and everywhere it would say, our mission is to serve sports fans everywhere, every day. And you could talk about a sports fan in all sorts of ways, but they were a fan. And so when I was at Grantland, these were Bill Simmons' people. It was his fans. They were humans. And at ESPN, whether it's a fantasy user, somebody who's obsessed with soccer, or like an NFL fan, you knew that person that you were working for and building for. And it was huge and a big part of that company culture every single day. Part of knowing them also is actually generating the data and insights and putting that together in a really structured way. So something that we've done at theSkimm relatively recently, about a year ago, is we've gone through this concept of like a loyalty exercise. So we look at audience engagement data across all of our platforms. So that's everything from the newsletter to the app, to the website, to our social channels, to our audio products. And we look at engagement data cross-platform, and then we marry that to qual and their affinity to the brand. And we bucket them into 5 tiers of skimmers. So a tier 1 skimmer, excuse me, a tier 1 skimmer, for example, is somebody who reads the newsletter and opens it at least 4 out of 5 days a week, is a Skimm ambassador, pays for our app, and follows us on our social channels. And we make sure we bucket out the whole audience in these segments and are constantly looking at how that's changing over time every single quarter. And again, that just goes to show this kind of obsession with the single user and the single audience and how we're going to track them over time. Another part of this is actually making sure you're evolving with them, because it's not just good enough to say, what are they doing with us? What are they saying about us? It's also saying, who are they and how are their problems evolving over time? So for us, that's really important, because guess what? Millennial women have changed a lot in the last few years. They are now moving into entirely new trajectories of their career. They're going through life decisions. It's just a whole new set of people than it was 5 years ago, 7 years ago when theSkimm was first started. And so for us, it's so important to constantly be reassessing our products and looking at who they are, how their problems are changing over time, and how we can continue to be their best friend and be the product that delivers the most value to them, and we don't sort of lose sight of that and lose sight of who they are and who they're becoming. My favorite example of this is actually the Daily Skimm. And so people always ask me, they say, what happens to the Daily Skimm if people stop reading email? And I'm like, guess what? It's not an email product. So the Daily Skimm tells you what's happening in the world to catch you up in your morning. And so if your morning routine changes, the daily Skimm will change with you. So for example, a long time ago, people used to read newspapers in the morning. Now they check their email in the morning. In the future, that might mean connected devices, which we're already experimenting with. And so I want to stay on top of this audience and how her morning routine is changing and evolving, and be right there with her to deliver that same value to her, no matter what she's doing differently in her morning. Another example is focusing on how their actual problems are changing over time. So theSkimm, as a company, we've spent a lot of time thinking about the millennial woman and, again, the types of questions that are coming up for her. And we've started to test and experiment with a lot of different new categories. So up here, you have an example of, in our texting product, we actually offered the opportunity to ask about financial advice from Elvest Financial Advisors as a partnership. And we're thinking a lot about how theSkimm can be a guiding light for them in all sorts of ways, even beyond news. This one you probably saw coming, but I think a lot of companies treat user insights and research as nice to haves. It's something that you do a lot later on in your company's life cycle. It's kind of a luxury, and that has never been the case at theSkimm. We hired our first insights employee in the first 30 people, and it is so embedded in the DNA of what we do every single quarter, every single project. And so what I like to say is that insights and data are the teams that actually hold us all accountable to what the audience is actually saying and doing. And that is their job. Their job is to say, no, this is what they are saying, this is what they are doing, we are not following them, or what we are saying is wrong, or actually you should be thinking about this. And so the insights team actually tends to break up their work into two different areas. They do a lot of that broad strokes research, like I mentioned, so diary studies, just broad strokes research around what problems women have in their lives, and then we do a lot of, obviously, user research around actual product testing and how that should evolve over time. But again, it's really embedded in the core of the company and is not treated as kind of a luxury or a nice to have. ESPN was the same way. My last 2 years at ESPN, we went down to Disney World every month to user test and just get in front of sports fans coming from all over the world. And it was the most amazing experience because Disney World is obviously incredible, but it's also a place where people are coming from everywhere. And so you get to talk to all types of sports fans and put your products in front of all sorts of people. And it was a recurring thing that was always on the calendar and something that we were doing no matter what stage our products were at. And it was so important to have that embedded in the DNA of how we operated and what we did. The second thing is when you have a really obsessive audience and you're trying to figure out what products you want to build for them, it is really important to figure out the right balance between having a vision, having a North Star, and that user feedback and what you're going to do about it. So first and foremost is when you're getting feedback, when you're testing things, when you're asking them questions, it's so important to really extract the problems from the wants. So Skimm'rs love talking to us. I can tell you that every day we have hundreds of people who just hit reply to the email and just type their feelings to us and things that they want from us, which I love. And we actually have all of the company go through rotations to actually respond to user emails, which is awesome. But it can be really hard to find the signal through the noise, right? And it can be really hard to figure out which of these are actually acutely felt problems that we can solve in a really unique way, and which of these are just people saying, I want you to do everything for me, come on, Skimm. And so I really try to have the team focus on listening to it, keeping a pulse on all the feedback, especially when we're doing actual product testing, but go through a whole process of hearing that feedback and extracting the problem that is coming from that feedback. And again, my favorite example of this is the calendar. If we had listened to what our Skimm'rs said that they wanted us to actually build, I don't think we would have built a calendar because that's just not something that would come to mind for them when they're thinking about ideas. So instead, it was really important for us to focus on listening to the problems that they had throughout their day and the questions that arose, and then thinking about how we could solve them. But it's definitely a challenge because you're hearing it all the time. The next, this is not a new concept. I think MVPs are kind of hot right now, so that's awesome. But I've been really bullish on getting as focused and as granular as possible before you even build something. So this calendar example, we could have waited, we could have built a whole app, we could have built out an entire product experience, but we knew that the most important thing to test was the content, whether that was actually going to be valuable. And I think you can always get scrappier, you can always get more focused and validate the very first thing that is underlying that bigger assumption, that bigger vision that you have. Related to all of this is false positives. So like I mentioned, Skimm'rs love us, they love giving us feedback, but they also love telling us that they love us. And that's wonderful, it makes me feel really warm and fuzzy. But also sometimes it's hard to not think that everything you create is amazing, because sometimes for them, they just want anything that we build, and sometimes that means that 4 months from now, it's not necessarily going to be a strong, engaged product, it's just something they wanted in the moment. And so for us, it's really important to figure out how to train our whole employee base, not just our insights team, on how to really listen to that feedback, and also form user testing scripts and really understand how to extract the exact insights that you want. I think pricing is the best example of this. Again, pricing is really hard. Willingness to pay tests are really hard. For us, it's exceptionally hard. People will tell us, I'll pay 20 bucks a month for that. Absolutely. And guess what? They would churn out 2 months later. So it's really important to figure out how to structure our testing and to make sure we're really extracting the clear, objective insights from this. The last thing that's really important for us is brand. Brand is so important to who we are and what we do, and it's really, really important that a product team embodies that. And so I think what's interesting about that is that a lot of times I see PMs and product teams operate in what I call product swim lanes and silos. So as a PM, your job is to ship and to build and to figure out what you build. And it's really easy to just get caught up in that and just do that. At our company, that isn't gonna cut it, because there's so much more that goes into product development than product design and engineering. And so it's about extending, it's about thinking about how the brand, the voice, the editorial content, the community, all of that needs to go into the product that you're creating, not just the features and the design. And so for us, something that's worked really well is that we've expanded the concept of a product development squad. So some of you might have this at your companies, a pod, a squad, whatever you want to call them. It's a cross-functional team, often product design, engineering, working together towards a goal, towards shipping and iterating and building a product. We have taken that model and actually expanded it to include marketing, editorial, and often insights and analytics, sometimes even sales, because we want all of those voices and all of those stakeholders actually involved in building the product. My favorite is watching editorial be on a product development squad, because they are the product. For us, content is that product. And so for them, being part of that development process, iterating on it, ideating, it's so critical to who we are and what we do. And it would be way too easy for product design and engineering to go over here and build some cool product interfaces, and for the rest of the company to be kind of creating the layers above it and the things that go into it. And so this was really core to our culture from day one, to make sure that product development embodied more than what is traditionally involved in product development. I also think figuring out how to create a product strategy that actually leans into your brand and what your brand stands for is super important. So for us, our product strategy at its core is how can we fit information and utility together in a way that delivers confidence to you. And what I mean by that is it's not just about the utility of a product, and it's not just about the information. It's those two things actually coming together to give somebody just the amount of information they need to know to go about their day. So whether it's the email newsletter, the calendar, the texting product, an audio podcast, it doesn't matter. All of these things are delivering a piece of information that has a utility behind it. And that, again, is not just a product strategy, it's a product strategy that has a center point around who we are as a brand and our mission statement as a brand. And then lastly, I probably said this a few times now, but it's just so easy to underestimate how brand, editorial voice, community, all of these things that sometimes as product people we think of as like the icing on the cake or kind of the thing at the end, or just like a marketing thing, is actually so critical to the relationship that your products have with your audience. This is all one thing. And I think I put some kind of feedback and some tweets, some things from our Skimm'ambassador group. I think it shows itself here, because the way people talk about the Skimm and our products is just different. They feel like we're their actual friend. They feel like it's a brand that that speaks to them, that gives them the value that they need throughout their day, and that is not delivered with just a utilitarian product. That is delivered with all these things working together, and that is something that is core to our product culture and core to kind of who we are as a company. So let's talk about a couple of frameworks to actually apply some of this. Some of this might feel a little specific to the Skimm, but I promise it's not, because everybody can do this. So the first is audience obsession. So I think audience obsession is a commonly used term, and I think it often speaks to how do you have data, how do you have research, how are you always incorporating customer feedback. But again, not enough people talk about how that is embedded into your company culture and how it's in the je ne sais quoi of a day in the life of your company. And what are people saying when they're in a meeting room without product design in the room? How are they talking about your users or Skimm'rs? There's so much that goes into audience obsession that isn't just the product team. And that is really important at the stakeholder level and also at the one-on-one conversations that happen at your company every single day, and seeing and making sure that everybody really does value your audience feedback, what the problems that you're solving for your audience, and it's really critical to how you see the success of your company. And so I see it as a really simple triangle. I think it's the actual data, which is what is your audience actually doing and how are they engaging. It's the research behind that. It's what are they saying? What are they feeling? What is their affinity to your brand? And then again, it's that company culture. It's saying how is that language just embedded in the core of how all your employees go about their day. The next is what I like to call the brand checklist. So first and foremost, think about your brand assets. What are our strongest assets? What words do people use to describe us and the value that they derive from our products? Audience relationship. So how can we actually deliver that emotional connection with our products, not just the utility behind it? And the third is people. So who is actually key to integrating brand into everything that we do? And how do I take them and embed them into my product development process so that they don't just come in at the end, they're part of everything that we do. And that's all. So last thing, I would be remiss if I didn't say that I wanted feedback because that was core to what I just talked about. So would love if you could fill out an NPS survey on this talk, and I would love to iterate on it. Thank you.
All right, we're going to pass out mics for questions so that we can pick them up on the recording. Just raise your hands.
Hi. Thank you so much. Very informative session. I had a question about, so you were the first PM at ESPN.
Yes.
That meant you really, I guess, got to create the strategy and the organizational culture for product. How do you decide to take the risk to go to the Skimm? Like, what were the criteria you were thinking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. Wasn't planning on it. So my goal leaving ESPN was to take what I'd applied and learn into something totally different. So my plan was to leave media, go to a whole different challenge, try something new, but that wasn't going to be an early stage startup. I ended up meeting the Skimm founders. They didn't know what product was. I didn't know what they were doing. And we had this hilarious conversation where I was trying to explain to them product, and they were like, where's your portfolio? Do you code? Like, it was just a hilarious, 2-hour confusing conversation. We ended up hitting it off. And I think the turning point for me in that conversation was that I wanted to take all these things that I learned about organizational design, product culture, the good and the bad, and building for an obsessive audience, which I felt like I had a sweet spot around, and then building that from scratch. Because when I joined, there was no product design engineering. It was so fun to recreate product culture at a company that I felt like was audience obsessed. So that concept of editorial on a squad, did that from day one. And that was so much fun. So it was definitely a leap of faith. It was scary to join a 10-person startup, but the challenge of taking the good and bad of what I had learned and figuring out my version of that was the coolest thing in the world. So.
Thanks, enjoyed that. Very easy question. Well, what do you mean by diaries?
Oh, yeah, totally. So our insights team loves to do this thing called diary studies where they, depending on the thing that we're trying to solve for. So for example, I think about a year ago, they did a news habits diary study where they recruited a group of 30 people from our Skimm audience, and they had them log their news habits and consumption over the course of a week in like a diary format. And like literally it was just like bulleted lists. And it wasn't just the things that they were consuming, like, oh, I went to CNN, or oh, I saw, an article. It was also, when do I have a question that I can't answer because I don't know the answer to it? So it might be a dinner conversation, it might be a work kind of water cooler thing. We wanted to figure out like when could we hit them in those moments. Another one that we did was just mobile routines. So we actually had them download, I forget the name of the app, but it's one of those apps that like tracks the time on your phone. This was before Apple rolled that out. And we had them download that, and we just tracked their app usage every single day so we could understand what types of apps they're using on their phone. That's where we got the calendar, messaging, and email as the top 3 apps that our audience uses. We try to refresh that on a constant basis because there's new things that are changing, but it's generally just like broad strokes, what is this audience doing? What problems do they have? It's not with like a specific product in mind. I think, yeah, there we go. There's a mic right there. Oh.
Hi, thanks so much for the talk. It was wonderful. I've been a skimmer since the beginning.
Yay!
Yeah, I love the skim.
Skimmer.
So super exciting to hear that. So the user base for the skim seems really specific, working millennial woman.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to hear if you've ever thought about extending that beyond that one niche power user into like a say Gen Z, for example, or are you laser focused on growing just for this one audience?
Yeah, very common question we get. So the answer right now is we have way more to do because the millennial woman has a lot of problems that I think the Skimm is uniquely positioned to solve, like I kind of hinted at beyond news. And the audience size is pretty large. I think it's a market cap of 27 million in the US. So we've got a lot to do, and not just grow, but also deeply engage. So we're really focused on that tier 1 to tier 5 skimmers. We want everyone to be a tier 1 skimmer. They engage with everything we do. And so we, again, feel like we have a lot more to grow there. In my opinion, I think that we are also creating a model for how to think about building for a really specific demo and like living and breathing them and solving their problems. And I think we've proven that to be successful so far. So I think it can apply to if we take a whole new lens. But I also believe in the authenticity of that because you do really have to know that audience. So it's not as simple as just saying, great, now let's make the daily skim for Gen Z. Like you really have to live and breathe that audience. So I think we'll never take that flippantly and just try to suddenly, scale this out to 4 different groups of people because we recognize that that relationship and that building up of that trust is so important. Doesn't matter, mean we won't do it in the future. One thing we have done actually with our election products and content is we've created Spanish language versions of them. So we've kind of dabbled in figuring out how we can reach a different audience with some of our content and products, more of a test than anything else, but that was a really cool thing for us to try out.
Hi. I'm curious how you framed to the Skimm when you first joined the team or when you first met the team, why there was a need for products. So you mentioned that there was this confusion, and so I work with early stage startups, mostly engineers, and so how did you frame it in a way that they figured out they needed you or someone like you, and what did they think they were getting in the first place, or what did they think they were looking for?
Oh man, so I wouldn't recommend doing it the way I did it, is the one thing I'll just caveat. It was a hilarious conversation because they kept asking me for my design portfolio or being like, oh great, you can be our CTO or engineering lead. And I was like, I haven't done coding in like 6 years. Bad idea. So it was super confusing for the first 30 minutes. I think what was the most helpful for me was actually just starting to ask them a ton of questions about where they were going, what they wanted to do. And this actually wasn't just the first conversation because we've had it over time as we've thought about scaling and growing the company. What does our executive team look like? Is product at the executive level? So it's not just the first conversation. It's always a conversation about what role does product play in your organization. So for the Skimm founders and for me, to be honest, it was a few factors. One is who the founders are and who they need as a partner by their side. I do think that founders who come from a product or a technology background can potentially lead an organization of designers and engineers and even a PM and not necessarily need that product leadership early on. When you have founders who, like our founders, were, journalism backgrounds, had like a vision but needed it to come to life, they need somebody at a strategic level making their vision happen. And for them to have to figure out how to do that with a team of designers and engineers and a PM not at the strategic level would have been challenging, And so it started to become a conversation about where they were going and what their vision was. And when we talked about it, I realized that they had a bigger vision. They wanted to build out a whole suite of products that solved millennial women's problems. And that is a product-driven company strategy where you need product at that level. And that wouldn't necessarily have been the case with something different. I think that was like the turning point for us in that conversation and still is today. I think our product strategy is our skimmer-driven strategy is our company strategy. They are all interconnected. It's not kind of a derivative of the company strategy. So that's always really important to us.
Hey, thanks again for that really awesome insightful
Wait, quick shout
talk.
out. Juhi and I used to dance together 10 years ago, so we go back.
Yes. So history. So it's the first time I've seen Dheerja speak live, so this is a really great experience. And the thing that coming from a very non-product background, what I found most interesting is when you spoke about how you like bringing in all the different parts of the company to make product decisions, because everyone is ultimately a part of the product. And so you obviously know what it is that you've gained the most as a product person from the other parts of the company. Do you have any insight on what the other parts of the company, especially my highest interest would be in editorial, what have they gained from being more a part of the product conversation?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think that what I've seen, and I compare this to kind of more traditional models that I've seen where you have a little bit more of the silos between the teams, what I've seen is that especially editorial, these teams breathe kind of product thinking and design thinking and embody it in their day-to-day. So a really good example of this is our editorial team, when they write or create a single piece of content, even if it's for social, is thinking about what problem is this solving. That is incredible because they're not just creating content for the sake of creating content, which a lot of media companies do, to be perfectly honest, like volumes of content, volumes of articles, like spew it out to the world. They are thinking thoughtfully about how every single thing I do should have a purpose behind it. And that is jobs to be done. Like that is, product and design thinking. And like the fact that they do that without being on a product squad and, just doing that in their day-to-day is incredible. I also see a lot of asking for feedback and asking for testing. We actually got into this zone where everybody wanted to test everything. I think editorial every week would be like, let's A/B test it. And I was like, what? Really? But it was awesome because there was this culture around learning quickly, getting feedback and testing it. And that's when you know it's been a success because that's something that is initiated by a different team that doesn't traditionally think that way. Yes, then you have to start teaching frameworks around this stuff. So when is something should A/B test? When should you just do it? There's a lot more then that goes from that, but they use Looker dashboards, like they are in it. And I think that is super, super awesome. And I've seen a lot of value come from that. So, yeah.
Hi. Thank you for speaking tonight. This is kind of a two-part question. It's about the calendar. I think it's super interesting that you found out that was, something that your customers were looking for, and I'm curious in how you actually went about implementing that and how you chose the events and how that's changed over time.
Yeah, definitely. So the actual product ended up being pretty simple to build. So we tap into kind of the concept of subscribing to a calendar, very similar to how you might share a calendar with a friend through Google Cal. And then there's sort of a CMS that editorial can just program events into. So when we shipped it and launched it, it was an all-in-one calendar. It was like the Skimm calendar, and it was our editorial filter on what we think you really needed to know about. It was a high bar because the hardest part about the calendar is that it is very disruptive. And so first and foremost, I think that the trust people have in us and the fact that they opt into this thing without knowing what it's going to be says a lot about their trust in us. I believe when we launched, we had an 85% opt-in rate for the for them to just integrate all events automatically into their calendar. That is incredible because I don't even know if I would do that. I'm obsessive about my calendar. And then two, we had to be very careful and get constant feedback about things that felt disruptive, because again, one event in there that feels a little annoying could turn somebody totally off. So where we ended up iterating from there was to continuing to add layers of customization to it. So we ended up iterating on it and adding the option to opt into different categories. So we now have a general calendar that is a really high bar. We're talking like Super Bowl, UN General Assembly, election. There's politics, sports, business and technology, and oh my God, I'm blanking. I think there's one more. Anyway, so you can opt into different categories and kind of customize a little bit. You can remove a specific event if it's annoying you. And then my favorite thing is that we started launching these like moment-based calendars. So our biggest marketing acquisition moment since we first launched the product was the Olympics. We launched a separate Olympics calendar where we curated all of the main events you need to tune into. We put it at the time. We put a link to directly live stream it. And you can imagine it's madness during the Olympics. So like the gymnastics final, you know, soccer, USA basketball, and it was like gold. So we've continued to try things like that, and it's just a really simple utility that's been really fun.
Hi. You've spoken a lot to the different feedback that you get from customers and how they bring a lot of different ideas to the Skimm, and I'm curious how you prioritize your backlog of ideas and go through that framework.
It is so hard. I think that's a little bit of that signal through the noise thing. And to be honest, also the company is so involved in product development. It is really kind of a center point of the company culture that a lot of the ideas and feedback is also coming from employees all the time. So PM's job is fun. So I think what we started to do was one, we always wait a little bit, you know, because you get really excited about an idea. We've all been there, even ourselves, and you get some feedback and you're like, oh my God, I love that. And just wait a week and see if you still love it. That's the first thing. Two, we created this concept of like a discovery spec. And so when we think about our product development process, there's discovery and solutioning. And we are starting to be a lot more methodical about the discovery process. And so even if it's like a feature idea, a PM will just flesh it out just a little bit into like a discovery spec, which is, you know, what is the objective here? What problem does this solve? What is the size of that problem? And if it requires some research help, then we'll do some of that research and kind of a little proposal almost for themselves sometimes too. And that just puts a little bit more thought behind it for us to sort of size the impact versus effort on these things and figure out if it makes sense to reprioritize into our roadmap or not. So we're trying to do that on kind of a pretty consistent basis. I'd like to say weekly. It's probably more like monthly, but just kind of looking at all the things that come through, re-looking at our roadmap and saying, hey, like, this new thing came in, I did some sizing around it, and I think it's like, you know, high impact, low effort, like let's swap it in. And I think that's been huge. The other thing I'll say is autonomy is huge for us. So each PM on the team has full autonomy of their roadmap. They have a goal they're working towards on a quarterly and a yearly level, and what they want to do to achieve that is up to them. And so whether it's bringing in feedback and ideas that are coming in, company feedback, there's a lot of opportunity to kind of swap out what you're doing, and you're not signed up for like a year-long roadmap that is hard to move.
We'll take one more question and then wrap things up, but there'll be time to talk to Dheerja after this. So.
Hi, thank you. So you mentioned you have 5 tiers of loyalty, right? So how do you think about what kind of things you do to move people from one tier to another? And is that, like, I mean, obviously you're a product, but there's obviously marketing, content, all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So the framing of that is to give our marketing and product team to the opportunity to sort of see where we stand and to target things. So it's mostly used by our marketing team to understand how we kind of think about our funnel, how we move people through our different products. And it also helps us map the success of our products to whether it's actually doing something for the brand. And that has been the most important thing, which is, you know, there might be great engagement data, something might look successful, but it's important to constantly check it against what is it doing for the overall relationship that an audience member has to the Skimm, instead of like the data around that product in a vacuum. And so, for example, when we launch a podcast, that podcast might be hitting all the like podcast benchmarks, but we're immediately assessing if that's doing anything for bringing people into the Skimm brand and the loyalty and the relationship that we have with them. So that's kind of an overarching strategy thing. And then yes, the marketing team will use those tiers to target. So we'll send, at a very tactical level, we'll send different types of retention tactics to different tiers and use different language. We'll do a lot of re-engagement work with the tier 4s and the tier 5s. We'll think about different potential product experiences at a very simple level. So we'll maybe try a different version of the daily Skimm to fading tier 4 skimmers to see if that brings them back up. So it really is mostly used at a tactical level by like the lifecycle marketing team. But it is something we're all kind of like living and breathing, because it's like, this product is for a tier 1 skimmer and I want to like get them to pay for this, or this product I think will re-engage the tier 3s into it being a tier 1. We talk it that way now. So yeah.
Awesome. Dheerja,
Cool.
thank you so much.
Thank you. Feedback. Thanks.
One last thing from you. You got a raffle ticket on the way in. Please.
I get to pick?
You do.
Cool. All right.
All the honors.
Okay. I think I still picked the one that I first started on. Okay. Am I just reading
Please,
the number?
yeah.
I've never done this before. Okay. 046684. Is it you? Yeah. Congratulations. What did she win?
You are now the proud owner of DigitalOcean
Okay,
slippers.
that's awesome.
Wow.
Oh my God, those are amazing. That is amazing.
The slippers are now a highly coveted item. Thank you, Dheerja. So as I mentioned before, we do shout outs if you're looking for a job, if you're looking to hire, if you want customers, if you want feedback. Now is your chance to come grab the mic and talk about what you're doing. And if there's nobody, it's really awkward, guys. You have to stand up, though. That's part of it.
Well, this is uncomfortable. I am actually looking for a product marketing or growth marketing job. So if you have any leads, please come talk to me.
What's your name?
Sorry? Oh, my name's Thruthi. If you need my LinkedIn, you can just come find me.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name's Lauren. I work for Capital One. I'm a product manager in their consumer bank, specifically working in the account opening experience. So if you apply for a checking or savings account at Capital One, that's the experience that my team help us build. But we are hiring designers, product managers, engineers, specifically Android and iOS developers. But please come talk to me and I'll point you in the right direction and get you connected to some folks at Capital One. Thank you.
It's another hiring pitch. My name's Deep. I work for CNBC, also in the news space, and we are looking for product managers for OTT, product managers for user data, product manager for revenue, and then we're also looking for lots of engineers. So if you know any React engineers, iOS developers, we're looking for those as well. So thank you, and you can look me up on LinkedIn or speak to me afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks. No one wants native engineers, I guess. Anyone else? All right. 2 more things from me, then I'll leave you alone. Dheerja kind of stole our thunder a little bit with the MPS shout out. So, we care a lot about feedback too. We want to make these events as impactful and as useful as possible. You'll be getting an email from Products That Count this evening, or maybe tomorrow, not sure. Either way, we asked for MPS and just some quick feedback on how we can make this event even better, because hopefully it was good. And finally, next month, so we do these events here at DigitalOcean every 3rd Wednesday of the month. The next event is on June 19th with Eleanor Morgan, who is the Chief Experience Officer at Casper. She's going to be talking about building brands that count. She is an incredible lady. Background is in IDO, physical product design, moving into Casper, which is kind of like physical and digital. So it should be really interesting talk. Hopefully, can see some of you guys out here next week. And thank you all for coming tonight.